Welcome. This is In the Evening with Ike Kruchler. Choosing to live on the edge of civilized society can have a good deal of perks to it. But part of living a solitary life is accepting the danger that comes uninvited with the freedom of providing for you and yours alone, and answering to nothing but what New Age types call the inner guide. This style of life is sought out by many but fit for few, and, as one family discovered, can come at a high price. Boyer Lake sits nestled between Mount Harland and Mount Dixon in the little city of Betts, not too far east of Penticton in British Columbia, Canada. Long winters, hot dry summers. The surrounding area is popular for vineyards, but the uneven terrain surrounding Boyer Lake has led to it being left more or less untouched. Naturally, local legends have arisen. Every lake that's big enough has a monster, or so we're led to believe. I've traveled a fair bit in my time, and if I had $1 for every creature said to be lurking in the lakes or forests nearest to whatever small town I may be holidaying in, well, I don't know, I wouldn't still be wearing this jacket, I guess. But, by and large, these tall tales are as harmless as the creatures in them are bullshit. Just some overexcited and understimulated folks who claim to have caught a glimpse of some strange something in the night or heard morbid titterings from a friend of a friend or whatever. To me, Boyer Lake stands out. And by that I mean, the Boyer Lake creature may be the first of these strange somethings I've heard of that's amassed for itself a considerable and almost credible body count. I hope you like poetry, because I've got a poem here, a real folksy one, said to date back to the 1910s about a little cabin built by Christopher Carey for his family. They called him Kit. There is, of course, no record of them ever existing, but it's food for thought. Here goes. If once I were a woodcutter in deep midwinter's take, then sooner would I want for wood than cut from Boyer Lake. As sure a man or mother can, I trust, a place can hate. I know Kit Carey didn't trust, and so he met his fate. 4 boys and just as many girls and curly-headed wife set off with him o'er hill and valley, gay and full of life. But once they settled by the water, Kit strayed from his house. He left behind his sons and daughters with his loving spouse. He'd left together kindling long as afternoon sun shone. But when the man came back at dusk, Kit's kith and kin were gone. They say a crookback creature skulks in Boyer's darker depths, and while Kit Carey went for wood, into his house it crept. The creature left a mournful wake, Kit's bloodline sapped irreparably. He took an oak from Boyer Lake, and Boyer felled his family tree. That's the poem. It's nice and all, but I can hear you saying it. Ike, you say, it's all made up. And yes, there's no record of the Carey family, thus no record of their inexplicable disappearance, other than local tall tales. How could they never have been seen by anyone again if they were never seen by anyone in the first place? And of course, as is commonplace in such a case, there is no evidence of any environmentally fanatical crookback creatures in Boyer Lake either, but there is a house on the edge of the lake. Seems to have been originally built well before 1910, though there's no sign of the Careys. It goes by the name Carey Cabin all the same. And in 1947, something happened there that sheds an uncomfortably bright light on this little limerick. The Walridge family, a family of 5, moved into the Carey Cabin that year. Now, that was an interesting time in North America. After the Second World War, industry was booming. Cities were expanding. The whole world was growing up and speeding towards the 50s a bit faster than some people were ready for. Armin Walridge was one of those people. So was his wife Judith. That's why, sometime between January and March of 1947, just a few short years from when the rest of their country and the country below it would have a TV set in their respective living rooms and a Frigidaire in their respective kitchens, the Walridges chose to pick up and haul ass to the scrublands of the Okanagan and isolate themselves in a little cabin they found by the lake. Armin had been a Boy Scout in the 20s, and though the 20s had long gone, he considered himself something of an outdoorsman still. And to give credit where credit is due, the family managed pretty well considering the conditions they were in, having to travel into town relatively rarely for supplies and food. They almost lasted a year. The oldest one of the kids, a girl, Patty, would have been 17 or so, and was a pretty little thing by all accounts, and as such, caught the eye of more than one local boy when she followed her father into town. And although she never stayed for long, you know what they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And one of these boys, with one of those hearts, went by the name Joseph Campbell. No, not that Joseph Campbell. And he thought that someday she'd make a good wife. So, one balmy August night, Joe took his dad's truck out into the scrublands, drove himself all the way out to Boyer Lake, where he met up with Patty. I don't know what happened next, but whatever it was, it didn't last too long. According to Campbell himself, Armin Walridge took after him with a shotgun he swears was loaded, and, as you'd imagine, Joseph drove on back home with his tail between his legs. Still, a young man like that doesn't give up easy. And, knowing the Walridges would come into town sometime or another, he kept a careful watch on the comings and goings in the area. He waited, and he didn't stop waiting. In fact, this boy patiently, doggedly, almost obsessively waited for Patty to come back into town for over half a year, 7 months. I guess things moved pretty slow for him. He kept telling himself she'd stop by sometime or another. It would only be a couple more days until he'd see her again, steal a kiss or whatever they did back in the 40s. But she never came. At first he reasoned that her father was delaying the trip back, that maybe he wouldn't bring her, but as the months rolled on, Joseph's sexual frustration steadily simmered down into legitimate concern for the family's well-being. So, in February of 1948, he took his dad's old truck back to Boyer Lake once again. And he came to the Carey cabin. And he didn't find anything shocking or disturbing at all. In fact, he didn't find anything at all. But sometimes that's worse. The Walridges just weren't there. Nothing else seemed to matter. Everything was just as it was left. Empty bottle out on the table, stacks on stacks of tin cans, real tin back then, packed in the larder, unmade beds, books left sitting open with the pages down on the bedside tables, Patty's 5-year-old brother Bruce's toys out on the carpet. No Bruce, though. No Walridges whatsoever. The whole thing looked just as if the family had all gone fishing, maybe neglecting to dust for a while beforehand. There were only 2 things that betrayed any hint of botheration. The first was the door. It was closed, but it wasn't locked. Not uncommon for the middle of the day in the middle of nowhere, but not quite dismissible, all things considered. The second was a bit more perplexing. A Christmas tree, decorated with all manner of ornaments and bits and bobs. It was all but skeletal. The floor around it carpeted with rust-colored needles. That put more of a carbon date on the whole situation. It would seem that the Walridges hadn't come home for at least a month, possibly 2. They never did come home either. And who knows, maybe they did go fishing, capsized and drowned. Maybe they got lost in the scrublands and all died of exposure, picked to nothing by buzzards and coyotes. Maybe they all skipped town and left their earthly belongings to collect dust in some final rejection of the trappings of what was then considered modern society. I don't know. But for me, it's hard to ignore the fact that it all happened in old Kit Carey's cabin, Maybe I'm full of it. But I can't help suspect at the bottom of Boyer Lake, and whatever crookback residence it may or may not house is holding back some pertinent information on the matter, especially when considering that the Christmas tree Armand Walridge had brought home for his family was a ponderosa pine, known to grow not too far from the lake's shores. I visited Betts in Boyer Lake a few years back. Saw a couple of gas stations selling shirts with pictures of sea monsters on them. The actual Carey cabin was accidentally burnt to the ground in the later 70s by some squatters, and all that remains now is the chimney stack. I wonder if one day they'll rebuild it, or carve out one of those sleepy suburban neighborhoods Armand Walridge ran so far to get away from. Who knows? All I can hope is that if they build anything over there, they don't get the wood from Boyer Lake. After all, that was Kid Carey's mistake.